Famous courtesans from history. The nobility's lovers for hire. It's been called the world's oldest profession, but the courtesan took it to another level. Their job constituted much more than a fast fumble down a dark alley or an hour upstairs at a brothel. They were educated and talented, and their success depended as much on their conversation and courtliness as their beauty and sex appeal. They were expected to dress elegantly and offer enthralling conversation, witty repartee, and emotional support to their patrons. Basically, to be the perfect girlfriend. For much of history, nobles married for political and dynastic reasons, not for love or companionship. Husbands and wives often lived separate lives, meeting only to produce heirs. So they found romance with other members of the royal court. In fact, the term courtship derives from court. With so many powerful and wealthy men prowling around for attractive companions, the courtesan emerged to supply the demand. Lovers for hire have been present in royal courts across the world since ancient times. But the term courtesan first appeared in Renaissance Italy, where two distinct classes were noted: cortigiana onesta, or honest courtesan, and cortigiana de lume, or light courtesan. Honest courtesans often came from the upper class. They were well educated and enjoyed elevated social status. Light courtesans came from the lower classes. They too were full-service escorts, but to a less august clientele. Both kinds of courtesans often had simultaneous careers as performers or artists. The cream of the courtesan crop had their pick of wealthy suitors. Noblemen would go to great lengths and offer incredible sums to woo them. It was common for courtesans to enter into long-term liaisons with a single wealthy benefactor. These relationships involved a binding contract witnessed by lawyers. Provision for the courtesan's financial welfare beyond the end of the relationship was usually included. Occasionally, when an affair had satisfactorily run its course, the gentleman would pass his mistress on to a friend, or arrange her marriage to a man a few rungs down on the social ladder from himself. But if she had displeased her patron, she might find herself banished from upper-crust circles and be forced into a life of street sex work. As men controlled most of the wealth, the majority of courtesans were women. But there were a few men who more discreetly catered to both male and female clientele. They were called cicisbeo in Italian, chevalier servant in French, and courtillon in Spanish. Now, let's slip behind the velvet curtain and meet 9 renowned courtesans from history. Veronica Franco was born in 1546 in Venice into the merchant class. While most Venetian women were given a basic religious education, she was taught by her brother's tutors. She proved to be a talented student and was able to socialize with learned men, writers, and artists. She leveraged her education into the best career a woman of her time could hope for, as a cortigiana onesta. Her mother was her pimp. She found her daughter wealthy clients, and when she was 16, arranged her marriage to a much older physician. Veronica gave birth to 6 children, only 3 of whom survived. After her husband died, she supported her offspring and paid for private tutors with her ample earnings. When she was 20, she was listed in the Catalogue of All Principal and Most Honored Courtesans of Venice. But Veronica would not accept just any caller. She entertained a who's who of Venice's wealthiest and most powerful nobles. She became involved with the renowned literary salon of Domenico Venier. With his support, she penned and published a book of poetry. Her writing was surprisingly bold for the time, addressing sexuality, women's agency, and challenging patriarchal norms. Veronica enjoyed a splendid career and lived well. But in 1575, an epidemic of plague ravaged Venice. She fled the city, and in her absence, her house was looted. When it was safe to return, she found that not only had much of her wealth been carted off, but she was facing a charge of witchcraft from the Inquisition. This was a crime commonly leveled against courtesans of the time. Luckily, Veronica's many powerful admirers managed to get the charges dropped. She published one more book of poetry in 1580, but as she aged and her patrons died, she fell into poverty. What became of Venice's greatest courtesan is unknown. Veronica was the subject of the 1998 movie Dangerous Beauty. Nell Gwyn, christened Eleanor, was born in London in 1650 to a single mother who ran a brothel. Nell may have worked there as a teenager. She and her sister were hired as orange sellers in the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. They wore suggestive costumes and, in addition to vending fruit, were paid to deliver notes from wealthy patrons to solicit actresses backstage. In the Elizabethan era, women had been banned from acting. But after Charles II came to the throne in 1660, women were permitted on stage. Nell's beauty and wit made her a standout, and she was hired as an actress. Acting was a grueling job in those days. Because so few people could afford tickets, theaters had to mount 50 different productions in a 9-month season to keep material fresh, the Baroque equivalent of scrolling through Netflix. Actors were required to memorize numerous scripts back to back, and Nell was illiterate. She managed to memorize her lines all the same and became a fixture of the stage. She was particularly skilled in comic roles and was dubbed Pretty Witty Nell. She had affairs with the theater's wealthy clientele for a fee. In 1665, bubonic plague decimated London, and the theaters were shuttered. Charles II headed out of the pestilent city, and he hired several members from the Royal Theatre Company, including Nell, to keep him entertained on the road. When theaters reopened, Nell's star continued to rise. One of the king's advisors wanted to supplant his main mistress, Barbara Palmer, and approached Nell about seducing His Majesty. She was seated in the box next to the king while he watched a performance, and Charles was far more interested in flirting with her than in watching the show. Afterward, he invited Nell out to dinner with his entourage. They had a marvelous time until the king realized that he hadn't brought any cash, and Nell had to foot the bill. She continued to act as she didn't expect the royal affair to last. But last it did for 17 years. Nell gave birth to 2 sons, Charles and James, who were ennobled by their father. She was his commoner mistress, while French aristocrat Louise de Carouaille became his main squeeze at court. The two were polar opposites. Louise was prim and proper, while Nell was a crack wit and loved to gamble and swear. Nell called Louise Squintabella and the Weeping Willow. While riding in her coach, she was mistaken for Catholic Louise. She stuck her head out the window and yelled to the crowd, "You are mistaken. I am the Protestant whore." Nell retired from the theater, and Charles gave her a townhouse in London and 2 country estates, where she frequently entertained him. The king commissioned a nude painting of Nell and had it hung behind a landscape, which he swung open to show favored guests. On his deathbed, Charles told his brother, the soon-to-be King James II, to let not poor Nellie starve. 2 years later, Nell, only 37, suffered a stroke which left her paralyzed. She died a few months later from syphilis. Marie-Louise O'Murphy's grandfather was an Irish Jacobite who followed King James II of England in his exile to France. Her parents had rap sheets at the Bastille prison for espionage, blackmail, and sex work. Marie-Louise and her 4 sisters also worked in the oldest profession. Notorious lover Giacomo Casanova met her while sampling the pleasures of Paris, and gave her the nickname O'Murphy, a pun on her name from the Greek for beautiful. Marie-Louise posed for François Boucher's Reclining Girl. When King Louis saw the painting, he was eager to meet the model. He promptly moved her into Stag Park, where she could be brought to his bedchamber in the palace whenever he liked. Marie-Louise gave birth to a daughter. After 2 years, Marie-Louise made an unwise attempt to replace Madame du Pompadour. The king was insulted and ordered her out of her home in the middle of the night. He commanded her to marry a handsome but impoverished aristocrat. She was given a fabricated pedigree and her groom a generous bribe. They had 2 children before he was killed in the 7 Years' War. Her second husband was even further up the social pecking order. With his connections and her clever brain, Marie-Louise was able to make a fortune in finance, buy a palace in Paris, and return to court in style. While there, she probably had another fling with the king, resulting in the birth of a daughter. When the revolution broke out, Marie-Louise was arrested, but she managed to negotiate her release. She ingratiated herself with the new order by marrying a member of the revolutionary government 28 years her junior. Marie-Louise lived to the age of 77. Rosalie Duthé was born in 1748 in France. Not much is known of her early life, but in her teens she was living in a convent. The religious life was not for her. She left and became the mistress of the English Earl of Egremont. He spent gobs of money to impress her, and is said to have been ruined by the affair. Next, Rosalie became a dancer at the Paris Opera Ballet. She continued her sideline as a courtesan and conducted affairs with various noblemen, including the Duc du Dauphin, the Marquis de Jolis, and the Comte d'Artois, the future King Charles X. The Duke of Orleans brought his 15-year-old son, the future King Louis-Philippe I, to visit Rosalie, so the young man could learn some facts of life. Rosalie was also an in-demand artist model. She sat for numerous portraits, often in some degree of undress. As such a famously sensual public figure, Rosalie gained notoriety. She was spotted riding in the prince's royal carriage on the Champs-Élysées, and a group of youths taunted her, singing, "La Duthé must have suckled royally." Rosalie had a habit of pausing for extended periods before speaking. This gave the impression that she was unintelligent and literally dumb. A satirical play was written about her called The Curiosities of the Fair, which kept Paris laughing for weeks. Thus, Rosalie acquired the dubious honor of becoming the first recorded dumb blonde. The lampoon so distressed her that she promised to kiss any man who could restore her honor, but no one took up the offer. Still, she enjoyed a long career and the admiration of many. She died in 1830, aged 82, and her autobiography was published 3 years later. Lola Montez, Countess of Landsfeld, was born Eliza Rosanna Gilbert in 1821 in Castle Oliver, Ireland. Her parents descended from the landed gentry. They immigrated to India, where her father promptly died of cholera. Her 19-year-old mother married a lieutenant. From a young age, Eliza was a mischief maker. Her parents hoped sending her back to Scotland to live with her stepfather's family might temper her behavior. There she was called the queer, wayward little Indian girl. She stuck flowers in the wig of an elderly man during church and ran through the streets naked. She was sent to boarding school, but at 16 she eloped with Lieutenant Thomas James. He took her back to India, but within 5 years their marriage broke down. Eliza left her husband to become a professional dancer. She made her London debut under the name Lola Montez, the Spanish dancer. She had jet black hair and striking blue eyes, but she was about as Spanish as Taco Bell is Mexican. She toured European capitals and settled in Paris. Like many thespians of her day, she picked up extra cash doing private performances for wealthy gentlemen. She had an affair with 19th century rock star pianist Franz Liszt, and he introduced her into the bohemian art scene. She became friends with George Sand and had an affair with Three Musketeers author Alexandre Dumas. Newspaper owner and drama critic Alexandre Dujardin became her boyfriend. His gushing reviews helped her career. But at a party, he grew jealous and challenged another man to a duel. Dujarrier was shot and killed. With her boyfriend dead, Lola decided it was time to get out of Paris. She moved to Munich, where her dancing grabbed the attention of King Ludwig I of Bavaria. According to rumor, when he first met her, he asked if her breasts were real. Lola responded by pulling down her dress to prove that they were. This was before the invention of implants. Ludwig showered Lola with gifts, including making her Countess of Landsfeld. This did not go down well with the Bavarian people, who resented the courtesan's political influence. She had strong liberal and anti-Catholic views, and got Ludwig to dismiss his conservative cabinet. When students at Munich University protested, Lola convinced Ludwig to close the school. In 1848, revolution broke out, and Ludwig was forced to abdicate in favor of his son, Maximilian II. Lola fled to Switzerland, where she waited for her lover to join her, but he never arrived. She moved back to London and married George Heald, a young officer who had recently come into a large inheritance. But Lola's first divorce did not permit remarriage. The couple fled a bigamy charge, and Heald died of tuberculosis 3 years in. Lola decided to make a fresh start in the United States. She was a sensation all the way to California, where many lonely men were flush from the gold rush. There she married husband number 3, Patrick Hull, but within months he sued for divorce. The doctor he accused of being her lover turned up murdered. Lola crossed the ocean for Australia. At the Theatre Royal in Melbourne, she performed an erotic spider dance and pulled her skirts high enough to reveal she wore no undergarments. Gold miners loved it, but the general public was appalled. Lola received abysmal reviews and went after a critic with a whip. On her way back to San Francisco, her manager fell overboard and was lost at sea. Lola tried to make a comeback in the U.S., but audiences weren't interested. Instead, she lived quietly in Brooklyn and spent her time helping abused women. By the age of 38, she was suffering serious symptoms of tertiary syphilis, and her body was wasting away. Lola died in 1861, age 39. Pauline Berloget, known as La Comtesse, was born Arthur Berloget in Paris to working-class parents. Her father was a coachman and her mother a dressmaker, so she had exposure to high society from a young age and longed to live a more genteel life. She transitioned in her teens and chose the name Pauline. Her mother accepted her and welcomed her as a daughter. Pauline began a love affair with an unidentified son of a marquis, but after a multi-year affair, he abandoned her. She continued to earn a living as a courtesan and singer in Paris's lively cabarets and cafes. But she was drafted into the French military and had to spend her time presenting as a man, which caused her great sadness. Desperate, she abandoned her post and was later arrested for desertion and sentenced to 10 years in prison. While incarcerated, she met fellow prisoner Gustave Anglais, whom she described as the love of her life. Upon her release, Pauline returned to her life in Paris as a woman. She was part of a thriving LGBT community in the City of Lights. There, transgender women were known as filles and mignons, and lesbians and transgender men as tribad sisters. In her 1874 autobiography, The Secret Confessions of a Parisian, the Countess, she describes the mutual support of the community, the sense of family, and the lavish parties and soirees they hosted. Pauline was given the title La Comtesse during a special ceremony within the community. She was an artist and drew sketches to memorialize herself and many of her friends in her book. Catherine Walters was born in Liverpool in 1839. She moved to London as a teenager and worked at a bowling alley, where she picked up the nickname Skittles. Her face was considered plain, but her figure fit the Victorian hourglass ideal impeccably. She also stole the attention of gentlemen with her incredible abilities on horseback. Her skills in the saddle opened paths into high society. Catherine became the lover of Spencer Cavendish, the future Duke of Devonshire, who set her up in style in Mayfair. She was a renowned courtesan and trendsetter. Her rides through Hyde Park attracted crowds, and aristocratic ladies copied her clothes. In 1862, at the height of her fame, Catherine fell in love with wealthy and married Aubry de Vere-Beauclerc. She sold her house and auctioned off her possessions, then followed him to New York, but the affair quickly fizzled out. Next, she moved to Paris, under the patronage of the French finance minister. She spent 10 years there and created a popular literary salon. Poet Wilfrid Blunt was infatuated with her for the rest of his life. Catherine kept up her reputation in the UK by attending hunting parties each autumn and showing off her equestrian skills. When she returned to London in 1872, she was in high demand. Her callers included the Prince of Wales, future King Edward VII. Catherine was discreet and would never kiss and tell. She had a long career and retired wealthy at 51. She died in 1920, age 81. Agustina del Carmen Otero, known as La Belle Otero, was born in 1868 in Galicia, Spain. Her father was a Greek army officer who abandoned her mother and left her to raise their child alone in poverty. Agustina spent her childhood working as a maid. At 14, she ran away from home with her boyfriend, Paco. They moved to Lisbon, Portugal, and worked as singers and dancers. By 20, Agustina found a sponsor who moved her to Marseille and launched her career. At the time, the French Riviera was the place for Europe's great and good to see and be seen, a veritable playground of art, culture, and lavish entertainment, both public and private. Agustina crafted the stage persona of La Belle Otero and claimed that she was an Andalusian Romany. Her beauty, captivating curves, and confident wit gained her great renown. It was said that her dark eyes were of such intensity that it was impossible not to be detained before them. Other of her body parts were also hard to look away from. Her most famous costume was little more than jewels pasted onto her voluptuous bosom. The twin cupolas of the Carlton Hotel in Cannes are popularly said to have been modeled after her breasts. Offstage, she lived a glamorous and scandalous life. She was the most sought-after courtesan in Europe and had her pick of wealthy lovers, including Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, King Edward VII of the UK, King Peter I of Serbia, King Alfonso XIII of Spain, and a few Russian Grand Dukes. She shared an apartment with King Nicholas I of Montenegro and Prince Albert of Monaco at the same time. She wrote fondly of Albert in her memoirs, noting that he suffered from erectile dysfunction. His wife, American heiress Alice Hines, was not pleased to see her husband traipsing about with the glamorous courtesan. The spouses had a screaming match in the Theatre of Monte Carlo in front of a packed house of society guests. And Agustina was banned from Monaco. 2 men fought duels over her, and supposedly 6 men died by suicide after she broke up with them. In 1898, French director Félix Mesguich filmed Agustina performing her famous Valse Brillante dance. The screening in St. Petersburg was so scandalous that the director was expelled from Russia. At the age of 50, Agustina retired with a fortune of $25 million. She purchased a mansion, but gambled away most of her wealth in Monte Carlo. She died in 1965, age 96, in a one-room apartment in Nice. Marguerite Alibert was born in 1890 in Paris to a coachman and a housekeeper. This proximity to wealth lit in her a longing to live a better life, and she imitated the manners of her parents' employers. When she was 15, she was babysitting her younger brother when he ran into the street and was hit by a truck and killed. Her parents blamed her and sent her to a strict Catholic boarding school, where nuns beat her and reminded her that her brother's blood was on her hands. She was sent to work as a maid in a wealthy household. There she had an affair with André Montclair, the teenage son of a nobleman. She became pregnant, but when her lover asked his parents for permission to marry her, they scoffed. Marguerite gave birth to a daughter, Raymonde, who was sent to live with relatives in the countryside. Despite her hardships, Marguerite became all the more determined to pull herself out of poverty. She started off singing in Paris nightclubs and went home with the richest man in the room. Soon, Madame Desnard hired her to work in her high-class brothel. The madam took her under her wing and trained her to act like a lady in the streets and a freak in the sheets. Soon, Marguerite was the top requested lady at the brothel. Her lovers, the top brass of French, British, and American gentlemen, paid her well enough to move into her own apartment and present herself as a society lady. She finally had the means to care for her daughter. She paid for her to attend an exclusive boarding school in England and saw her frequently. Marguerite had a long-term liaison with a wealthy wine merchant, André Miller, who was twice her age. The relationship lasted 6 years, and when things ended, André granted her a generous annuity. During World War I, Edward, Prince of Wales, was in France as an officer of the Grenadier Guards. His father thought it wise for the 23-year-old to gain some worldly experience before settling down with a nice princess. So he was introduced to Marguerite at Hôtel de Crillon, and he became instantly infatuated with her. The pair had a passionate affair for the rest of the war. Edward sent Marguerite at least 20 very candid letters from the front, including details of his sex life and his unflattering thoughts on his father the king and other prominent characters. When the war came to an end, the prince returned to London and forgot about Marguerite. Ever resourceful, she had held on to his letters, which, if published, would have destroyed the heir's reputation. She blackmailed him for thousands. With these funds and a settlement from an unhappy 6-month marriage to a wealthy officer, she upgraded to a mansion with a stable of horses and a limousine. But her lifestyle proved too expensive to maintain. While attending a party in Cairo in 1921, Marguerite made the acquaintance of Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey, a tycoon who was mistakenly called an Egyptian prince. He proposed, but he wanted her to convert to Islam and live with him in Cairo as a trad wife. Marguerite demanded that he sign a prenup, allowing her to wear her own clothes and divorce him if she wanted. But before the wedding, Ali tore up the agreement, and without proof of the contract, Marguerite was forced to live as he demanded. As Ali added more Muslim wives to the household, she grew increasingly indignant about being trapped. The couple fought frequently, often in public, but she had no legal recourse to leave. A year in, Marguerite convinced Ali to take her to London. There they went to a production of The Merry Widow, then came back to the Savoy Hotel and had a screaming match. At 2:30 a.m., employees heard gunshots. Marguerite had shot her husband 3 times in the back at close range. She made no attempt to run and was arrested on the spot. She had learned enough of her rights to know that if she had shot him in Egypt, she would have been executed. But in England, she had a chance and a plan. She pulled out Prince Edward's letters once more and compelled the British royal family to step in and help her. Her royally appointed lawyer painted her as the innocent victim of a vile, abusive husband. Her past as an entertainer and courtesan was forbidden to be brought up, so the prince's name would not be linked with the case. Still, there were many rumors, and the trial was a sensation, with people paying fortunes for seats in the courtroom. Marguerite was acquitted of all charges. After that, she retired to a quiet but luxurious life in Paris. She styled herself Princess Marguerite, though Ali had not really been a prince, and she was still wanted for murder in Egypt. She was close with her daughter and grandchildren. She quietly married and divorced another 5 times, each with considerable alimonies, without her family ever knowing about it. Marguerite lived to 80 and died in 1971. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other history videos. You can also join my Patreon to support my work and get early access to all of my multi-part series. Thank you for watching.